Thank you. I have known since I was 4 years old that I wanted to be a television anchor. I remember my parents and I, we lived in this little green apartment, and it was green carpet and green walls. Everything about it was green. But every night at 6 o'clock, my dad and I would sit down and watch Tom Brokaw deliver the nightly news. And I don't even think that he was paying attention, but I would grab every little 8x10 piece of paper I could find in the house and spread it around on the coffee table so I could look as industrious and as important as Tom Brokaw. I think my mom picked up on it because I remember her scouring the newspapers every day and looking for writing contests and essay contests to enter me into. Eventually, it was a spelling contest. Joya Das, your word is myrrhed, the adjectival form of the word frankincense and myrrh. You know what the three kings brought to baby Jesus? I'm a Hindu, I don't know. I won. I won, and it was my first time on the news. My mom told me what to say to the cameras. And I think it was probably the first time and the only time that she ever had a really strong opinion about something. Because she never weighed in on what was going on with Tom Brokaw on the TV. She didn't even weigh in on who our electricity provider was, or when our electricity was turned off, or when the car was towed away in the middle of the night, or when we came home one night and the electricity had not only been turned off, but we had been locked out of the house. My dad had locked us out. And she didn't weigh in when my uncle was on his knees begging him to stop, and she didn't weigh in when the bruises on her face turned from black to blue. What I do remember are the episodes of silence that would ensue after one of these incidents, and nobody would talk about it. Well, I was a little precocious kid, too. I knew that I was not going to become a television anchor living in these parts. So I was going to have to go to college. Yeah. A television anchor needs a college education. That's where I was going to go. So I moved to a small town in Pennsylvania in the rolling hills of what was the town called Lewisburg. That town had two things, a college and a federal penitentiary. And I went to the college. And I took creative writing classes. I took English literature classes. I took a class in Russian film, and I learned what the Odessa step sequence was. I was on my way. And then it was second semester, sophomore year, and I went to the registrar to register for my classes. And she said, honey, yeah, nobody paid for last semester, and they didn't pay for this semester either, so get out. And I was like, get out? Don't you know that I'm going to become a television anchor? And I need a college degree for that. I am not going anywhere. You and I, we are going to sit here, and we are going to figure this out. But I am not going anywhere. The fact of the matter is, for all that bluster, I was scared. I was 19 years old. Where was I going to come up with $16,000? I called my parents. I was like, yeah, so somebody owes somebody $16,000. And my parents were like, yeah, we didn't save for college. Actually went out and bought a really shiny new Mercedes-Benz, but we didn't save for college. And I was like, well, hang on a second. Now, you just hang on one second. I had scholarships to all of these lesser schools, big scholarships. I was a good student. Why didn't we talk about this? And all I heard was the click of the phone on the other end, because they weren't going to talk about it. Because you don't talk about finances as a girl in my household. So I was like, okay, recalculating. I started a very aggressive letter writing campaign saying, I am going to become a television anchor, and I need help because my parents don't have any stinking money. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote until finally, one day, I got a scholarship from a doctor in Missouri who would put aside a fund for aspiring journalists. And so between that funding 50% of my education and me jerry-rigging a solution with the school and federal loans and student loans, I got through college. I got through college, I got through grad school, I got my first job in TV, my second job in TV, my third job in TV, and then I finally was at a network where I was brought in to be the understudy for one of the reporters at the New York Stock Exchange. So the deal was that for 7 months, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., I would be her understudy, her producer, feeding her information about top line and bottom line and inflation at the consumer level, inflation at the wholesale level, EBITDA, pro forma, you name it, I got it. I was learning it, I was talking it. And the edict was, at the end of the day, I had to get up in front of the camera and I had to file my own report, showing my prowess in delivering financial news. And I was doing it. And then management changed. And then management changed, and I marched into that office and I said, you know, I was brought here to become a television anchor. And he was like, listen, I don't know what your prospects for that here. Here's your raise. It's a nice little $8,000 raise. But you know what, I don't really want to talk about it. And I had been fighting for so long already that I was crestfallen. I really was. I was like, man. And I remember there was this tape operator who would do the intake on my report at the end of each day. He was Trinidadian fellow. His name was JB. And every day at like 6:45, he'd be like, Joy, you gonna do that tape today? You gonna tape a report? I'm like, no, you know what, JB, it's not happening for me. It was one of those crossroads where my life could have gone this way or that. And I was like, you know what, it's not happening for me. And he was like, you get up there and you file that tape. And I filed a tape. And I filed a tape the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and then finally he took all those little tapes and took them to an editor in Brooklyn. I remember the guy had dreadlocks, and we sat there for a full Saturday and made Joya's reel. And that reel got me my first network job. And then I had another network job, and another network job, and finally, I was on the Jumbotron every day in Times Square just like Tom Brokaw. I did it. And I was now, as a natural extension of my career, being asked to give talks and MC galas and speak at schools. And then I was being interviewed. People were asking me, well, how did you, become one of the first Indian girls to become a mainstream television anchor? And then the conversation started to turn to my personal life. And what was it like growing up as an Indian girl in America? And it was a written interview, I remember, so I had to write everything that I was going to say in my answers to the questions. And it was the first time, in complete transparency, that I talked about being the child to immigrant parents. It's the first time that I talked about or wrote about the fact that I was what social workers called a secondary survivor of domestic violence. It was the first time I talked about the plight of the girl child in the world. And it was the first time I really talked about the power of persistence. And then I just forgot about it. Years went by, I did my thing, I was still on TV, and I remember I was emceeing a CD launch in Queens. There's a big Guyanese population there, big fans of my Saturday morning show. And I was emceeing this CD launch, and this photographer was just staring at me. And staring at me and staring at me. And finally she came over. I thought it was because I was wearing a gorgeous sari. I have a hard time keeping them on. And she said, I want you to know that I read that interview. I read that interview, and it gave me the courage to leave my husband, who used to beat me. I left with my 2 kids. And I want you to know that it gave me the courage to start my own business. Today, I'm a school photographer. I have all the contracts for all the schools in the area to take photographs of kids on Portrait Day. And I just want you to know that your interview gave me the courage to do that. And my mom would often ask me, quite tearfully actually, she would say, why'd you do that interview? Why'd you have to lay it all out there? And I don't know that I actually ever had an answer for her until that moment. Talking about it changed the trajectory of this person's life. It took some of that sting out of the failure. And I think as a culture, South Asians are masters at taking everything and just shoving it under the rug. But I don't think that real change, critical change, life-changing impact happens until you talk about it. I don't think I've mentioned that my dad and I don't speak anymore. We haven't spoken since 1999, and he'd written me a one-line letter saying, I don't want to speak to you anymore. But it's funny, because people at the local post office say he's always there talking about his big daughter who's in New York City as a big anchor. And they're like, yeah, but he doesn't talk to his daughter. And my mom and I, we have like a real touch-and-go relationship. You know, we're sort of, you know, she doesn't get me. I'm an American kid. And I intentionally left out the story of my brother because he is been incarcerated in federal prison from the age of 21 to 32. And he actually wants to have a conversation with me and talk to me. And I don't really want to talk to him. And my friends and I often look at me and they're like, well, doesn't that kind of make you then a failure? I'm like, maybe. I'm still working it out. But I am not ready to have that conversation with him. So what's my point? I think my point is that failure is something that I taste and is a huge part of my life every single day. But I think the difference is, before, my motivation was that I was just running from it. And now I'm choosing to talk about it. I'm Joya Das.